Rudolph Valentino was so much more than just a regular actor, but most of the things that made him special had nothing to do with his talent at all, but much deeper things that women seemed to notice and feel drawn to. His Latin lover image. When you think of Rudolph Valentino, you probably think of The Sheik, his most famous role that really set him up as the ultimate Latin lover. In that movie, he wasn't just any romantic lead. He was the embodiment of everything women dreamed of in a man: passionate, mysterious, and daring. His character was bold, taking what he wanted and not being afraid to show his feelings, but there was always something hidden beneath the surface. That mystery, it made him irresistible. Valentino had this intense gaze that could make you feel like he was looking right through you. Yet it wasn't cold. There was warmth and tenderness behind those eyes. His confidence on screen was undeniable, but it wasn't the cocky kind of confidence you sometimes see. It was more like, I know who I am, and I'm not afraid to show it. And that mix of confidence and gentleness made him the perfect romantic lead. He wasn't just the guy you saw in a love scene. He was someone you felt a connection with because he showed his emotions so clearly. His presence on screen was magnetic, and you couldn't help but get drawn into whatever role he was playing. But what really set him apart wasn't just the charm or the looks, it was his emotional range. Valentino didn't just play the tough guy or the lover who could sweep any woman off her feet. He was able to show vulnerability too. He'd give you those moments where he looked unsure or hurt, and you could feel his pain. It was the kind of vulnerability that made you care about him more. Sure, he could be bold and strong, but when he showed a softer side, it made him even more relatable. You weren't just watching a man chase after a woman. You were watching a man who had real feelings, who was conflicted, and who would fight for love. His ability to switch between strength and sensitivity made his characters complex. Women didn't just fall for the macho persona. His characters were deep, multifaceted. They weren't just perfect tough guys. They were real. When he did something romantic, like sweeping a woman off her feet or declaring his love, it wasn't just a performance. You could tell he meant it. And when he had those quiet moments of raw emotion, you couldn't help but swoon. It wasn't just about the grand gestures. It was the little things, the way he could make something as simple as a look or a gesture feel powerful. That mix of romance, intensity, and tenderness is what made Valentino such an unforgettable screen presence. He had mysterious appeal. Rudolph Valentino wasn't just captivating on screen. His real life was a mystery that only added to his charm. Women were completely intrigued by the man behind the roles, and honestly, who wouldn't be? His private life was like an open secret. He kept certain things about himself tightly under wraps, which only made people want to know more. It's kind of like when you meet someone who's a little elusive. You're naturally drawn to them because you want to figure them out, but they keep you at arm's length just enough to make you want to dig deeper. What made Valentino so magnetic wasn't just his good looks or on-screen charm. It was the fact that he didn't give everything away. He didn't spill his personal story to every tabloid or gossip column. People could only guess about his true thoughts, his loves, and his fears. That sense of secrecy, combined with his undeniable glamour, gave him this larger-than-life presence. He wasn't just some regular guy who lived a normal life behind closed doors. No, he was a star, and his life felt like it was part of an ongoing mystery. You couldn't help but be fascinated by it. There's something about a man who keeps his personal life just out of reach that makes him seem even more intriguing. Valentino didn't need to share every detail of his day-to-day life to make you want to know him better. In fact, the less you knew, the more fascinating he became. Women loved this. It made him seem untouchable, like a real-life fantasy they could imagine but never truly grasp. And that was exactly the appeal. He wasn't just a man. He was a persona, a dream, a figure who existed partly in reality and partly in the imagination. He gave off the feeling that he was something beyond ordinary, something that could never be fully understood or attained, and that made him even more irresistible. Tough but sensitive. When we think of movie stars like Rudolph Valentino, we often picture the tough, suave guy who's always got it together, the one who sweeps women off their feet with his charm and confidence. But with Valentino, there was so much more beneath that surface. He wasn't just a tough guy who played the bold lover in front of the camera. In his personal life, he was also a deeply sensitive soul who felt things more intensely than people realized. Valentino was known to have a soft side that defied the usual stereotype of the heartthrob. He wasn't just about looks and action. He was also passionate about poetry, art, and literature, things that showed he wasn't just another pretty face with a six-pack. He had an intellectual side that made him more approachable and relatable. He would talk about how much he loved reading and how certain poems or books would move him. It gave him a depth that women found especially attractive because it showed he wasn't emotionally distant or shallow, which is often the image that's slapped onto leading men in movies. This love for art and culture gave him a different kind of appeal, one that women could connect with on a deeper level. He wasn't just saying romantic lines in a film, he genuinely appreciated the beauty in life, whether it was through a piece of poetry or a painting. It made him feel more real, more human, and that's what women loved. They could see that Valentino was someone who had layers. He wasn't just this bold, mysterious figure on the screen. He had emotional depth and sensitivity, too. That combination of masculinity and vulnerability made him stand out, and it's a big reason why women adored him, not just for his looks, but for the person he was beneath it all. He was an eye candy. Rudolph Valentino wasn't just a good-looking guy. He was the kind of handsome that made people stop and stare. His physical appeal wasn't just about his strong jawline or his perfect features. It was the way he carried himself. His dark, smoldering eyes had this intensity that made it feel like he was looking straight into your soul. There was something magnetic about the way he'd look at someone, like he knew exactly what he wanted, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Combined with that strong, chiseled jawline and his defined features, he had this undeniable presence that turned heads and made women's hearts race. But it wasn't just his face or his looks that made him a visual symbol of desire. It was the way he moved. Valentino had this fluid grace to his movements, almost like he was gliding. Whether he was walking across a room or dancing with a partner, there was something about his physicality that was both powerful and elegant. His movements made him seem both strong and gentle at the same time, and that contrast is what made him so alluring. It was as if he could take control of a room without ever having to raise his voice. His presence alone commanded attention. Then there's his style. Valentino didn't just throw on whatever was trendy. He carefully crafted his image, and it showed. From the sharp suits that fit him perfectly to the luxurious leisure wear he wore in his downtime, his fashion choices always added to his aura of sophistication. There was a timeless quality to the way he dressed. Even in the most casual outfits, he looked like he had stepped out of a fashion magazine. His tailored suits, with their clean lines and smooth fabrics, highlighted his physique, while his laid-back yet still stylish leisure wear gave him a relaxed but equally refined air. Valentino's style wasn't just about clothes, it was about creating an image. He was the man who could look effortlessly chic in a tuxedo one minute and just as captivating in a simple shirt and trousers the next. His fashion choices helped build the image of a man who wasn't just handsome but refined, sophisticated, and always on top of his game. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about conveying a sense of confidence and elegance in everything he did. And that's why his physical appeal and style still hold up today. Valentino didn't just set the standard for looks, he set the standard for how to carry yourself with grace and confidence, qualities that still make him an icon. His passionate ambition. From the very beginning, his ambition wasn't about collecting accolades or chasing the next big paycheck. It was about perfecting his art and making a lasting impact on the world of film. You could see that in everything he did. Valentino wasn't just a heartthrob who showed up on set and delivered lines. He poured his soul into every role, bringing an intensity to his performances that made them unforgettable. Women were drawn to that kind of ambition because it wasn't about fame for fame's sake. It was about a man who had a vision, someone who was dedicated to doing something meaningful. His drive was the kind that spoke to a deeper purpose, one that went beyond the superficial perks of being a star. That kind of focus is attractive because it shows a man who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to work for it. It's a kind of ambition that speaks to personal growth, a constant push to evolve and perfect oneself, and that's something incredibly magnetic. Valentino wasn't the type to rest on his laurels. He was constantly pushing himself, challenging himself to be better with every performance. Whether it was perfecting his roles or learning more about the art of filmmaking, he had this hunger to succeed. But more importantly, he had the drive to do it with passion and integrity. Women admired that kind of ambition because it's rare to find someone who isn't just chasing the next high but is genuinely in love with the work they do. Valentino wasn't just making movies, he was contributing to something bigger than himself, and that kind of drive is endlessly attractive. His heart of gold. Rudolph Valentino wasn't just a pretty face with a killer smile, he had a heart of gold. Sure, he played the sultry Latin lover on screen, but in real life he was known for being one of the kindest, most down-to-earth guys around. He didn't let the fame or the adoration get to his head. In fact, he was the complete opposite of the typical egotistical, untouchable celebrity persona that people often expect. He treated everyone, from his fans to his co-stars, with a warmth and respect that made him stand out in an industry that could sometimes be full of big egos and competitive drama. It's easy to get swept up in the Hollywood hype and forget about being a decent human being, but Valentino didn't let the fame change him. Women noticed that. They were drawn to how approachable and genuine he was, not just his looks or his on-screen magnetism. He made time for his fans. He was polite with the press, and he didn't act like he was better than anyone else. When most people think of a movie star from the golden age of Hollywood, they think of someone untouchable or distant. But Valentino was different. He had this ability to make people feel like they were important, like he actually cared. And that's a rare thing in a world where so many people are just out for themselves, constantly trying to climb the social ladder. Valentino wasn't like that. He wasn't out there trying to prove he was better than anyone or flaunt his success. Instead, he stayed humble, even though he had every reason to let it all go to his head. Women loved that. It made him feel more real, more like someone they could actually relate to. And in a world of smoke and mirrors, that kind of authenticity was magnetic. It made him not just a heartthrob, but someone you could admire on a deeper level. Valentino's kindness wasn't some superficial public persona either. It came from a genuine place. He was humble, yes, but he also had a sincerity about him that made him even more attractive. There's something about a man who is confident enough to be kind without it feeling like a strategy or an act. It's just part of who he is, and that's a major part of why women fell for him. Not just because he was drop-dead gorgeous or an amazing actor, but because he was a real decent person who didn't let fame mess with his character. It made him not just swoon-worthy, but deeply respected and loved by everyone around him. A man of depth. He had a depth to him that many people didn't realize, especially given his Latin lover image. Beneath that charming exterior, he had a true intellectual curiosity that set him apart from the typical heartthrob. He wasn't just about the physical attraction or the glamour of Hollywood. Valentino had a genuine love for literature, poetry, and the arts, and that made him feel more sophisticated and worldly. This wasn't just a guy who was into the usual stuff most people would expect. He had a thirst for knowledge that made him far more complex than the stereotypical star. Women admired that side of him because it was refreshing. Here was a man who could talk about more than just his career or the latest gossip in Hollywood. He had the kind of conversations that made people think. Whether it was discussing literature or diving into philosophical debates, Valentino was someone who didn't just settle for surface-level interactions. He had opinions, and he wasn't afraid to share them, which made him feel like someone with real substance. Not just a pretty face who relied on his looks to get by. What really set him apart was the fact that he didn't keep these intellectual interests hidden. He embraced them and made them a part of who he was. His love for poetry wasn't some secret hobby. He would often share his favorite works and even write his own. This wasn't just a man pretending to be intellectual. It was a genuine side of him that gave him an air of sophistication and class, and that was something women couldn't help but find appealing. There's something incredibly attractive about a man who is well-rounded, who's not just defined by his appearance or his job, but is also deeply interested in culture, history, and the finer things in life, and it made him feel more approachable in a way. When you're dealing with someone who can engage in thoughtful conversations about different subjects, It shows that there's more to them than what meets the eye. Valentino wasn't the kind of guy who expected you to admire him from afar. He wanted to connect with people on a deeper level. And that intellectual curiosity of his made it easy for women to connect with him in a meaningful way. It gave him a multi-dimensional personality that was as intriguing as it was attractive. In a world where most men were either overly macho or just too focused on their looks, Valentino stood out as a guy who was as interested in the world around him as he was in the world of Hollywood. That added another layer to his appeal. He wasn't just good-looking or famous, he was thoughtful, intelligent, and curious about the world, which made him feel all the more captivating. Women didn't just love him for his movie star status. They admired him for his mind, and that made him even more irresistible. He was charming. There was something about Rudolph Valentino that was just different. He didn't play by the usual rules of what it meant to be a leading man in Hollywood. He wasn't the type to flaunt his power or go for those big, dramatic gestures that you often see in romantic films. In fact, he didn't have to try too hard at all. His charm was the quiet kind, the kind that snuck up on you, pulling you in without you even realizing it. Valentino's allure wasn't loud or in your face. It wasn't about him trying to be the center of attention. It was about this subtle, magnetic quality he had that made people want to be around him. It wasn't something you could easily put your finger on, but there was this undercurrent of mystery to him that made him feel untouchable in the best way. He didn't try to impress or manipulate anyone with flashy moves. Instead, he just was, and that in itself was enough. Women were intrigued by him for that very reason. He didn't give everything away at once. He wasn't an open book. There was always a little bit of mystery, something hidden beneath the surface that kept them coming back, wondering what made him tick. He didn't need to spell out who he was. His charm lay in the fact that you had to figure it out for yourself. It wasn't about showing off or trying to be the most charismatic person in the room. He had this effortless way of captivating attention without even trying. It's easy to overlook how attractive subtlety can be, but with Valentino, it was key. He wasn't shouting for recognition, but rather drawing people in with a quiet confidence that said, "I'm here, but I'm not going to make a fuss about it." And that made him feel mysterious and alluring. He had this unspoken sense of self-assuredness that made him feel like there was more beneath the surface, and that's exactly what kept women interested. This kind of charm is rare. It's the kind that doesn't need to be validated or confirmed. It just is. With Valentino, there was always a sense of wonder, like you were watching someone who wasn't trying to be a star, but just was one in the most understated, captivating way. It wasn't about being loud or attention-grabbing. It was about making his presence felt in the most refined and understated way possible. And that's why he didn't just catch your eye. He held it. He was loyal. In a world where relationships can sometimes feel shallow or short-lived, Valentino stood out because he truly gave his all, whether in friendships or romantic relationships. There was a steadiness to him that women admired, and his devotion wasn't just a public show. It was real and genuine. When it came to the women in his life, Valentino was committed, and it was clear. His relationships, both on and off the screen, were built on a foundation of trust and loyalty. He wasn't the type of man to flit in and out of someone's life. If he cared about you, he cared deeply, and he wasn't afraid to show it. There's something incredibly attractive about that kind of consistency. In an industry where so many relationships can seem temporary or based on convenience, Valentino's loyalty made him feel like a safe bet. For women, knowing they could depend on someone like him was comforting. He wasn't just interested in having a fling or enjoying the spotlight. He was invested in the people around him. Whether it was his dedication to his romantic partners or his devotion to friends, Valentino was someone who made you feel valued. He wasn't looking to play games. His love and loyalty were real, and that's something that made him feel rare, especially in an era where emotions could often be hidden behind the glitz and glamour. What made his loyalty even more appealing was the fact that it didn't feel like an act. It wasn't something he put on for the public eye. It was simply who he was. Valentino didn't just show up for the good times. He was there through the highs and lows, a constant figure of support for those he loved. Women saw this in him and were drawn to it because, Let's be honest, it's hard not to be attracted to someone who's genuinely committed and reliable. Loyalty isn't the flashiest trait, but it's one that really sticks. Valentino's devotion to the people in his life gave him an emotional depth that only added to his appeal. Women didn't just admire him for his good looks or the romantic roles he played on screen. They admired the man who was true to those he cared about, who offered loyalty without hesitation. In a world where connections can be fleeting, that kind of reliability felt like a breath of fresh air, and it made him all the more irresistible.